Hi, I'm attorney Gregory Dell here with attorney Cesar Gavidia, and we're going to talk about a Prudential long-term disability claim that Cesar recently resolved on behalf of one of his clients. And Cesar, in these videos we talk about the history of the claim, the definition of disability, the reasons why Prudential denied the claim, and then provide some tips for people who have Prudential long-term disability claims. Hopefully tips either help them stay on claim, get approved, or avoid a claim denial in the future. So tell us about the history of this particular case against Prudential.
So our client here, interestingly, was a sexton for a chapel at Princeton University. The university system there provided him and the other employees with Prudential long-term disability insurance, which he, intelligently accepted and took out because he had a history of severe cervical issues and spinal issues and problems that he was battling. He had to take leave from work to have cervical spine surgery for amyotomy because of his cervical stenosis. Basically, they had to widen that canal in his spine, and he was having a lot of problems in terms of pain and radiating symptoms into his upper extremities. He basically, and surgery doesn't always work for everyone. It doesn't resolve everyone's symptoms 100%. Sometimes there's a degree of resolution of symptoms or some abatement of the problems, but not always a complete. And that's what happened here for him. He still continued to suffer with chronic migraines, chronic blurriness in his vision. He still continued to have the radiculopathy in his upper extremities, and he was also having them down into his legs as well. So there was issues going on in his lower spine. And
so what was the basis for their denial?
So what essentially had happened is after he'd submitted his disability claim, the claim was reviewed then by a nurse case reviewer, a nurse claim manager. They found that he would be disabled for some period of time, covering the surgery and covering some post-surgery recovery. But the nurse case reviewer reached out to his doctors, his surgeon, who had come back and said that his problems had resolved about 80%. Hadn't said anything about being able to return to work, just that he had some 80% resolution of his symptoms. He had some follow-up injections that seemed to appear to resolve some symptoms. On that basis, the nurse recommended to Prudential that he wouldn't have any impairing symptoms after the 12-week recovery period, and that he could go back to his job as a sexton, even though basically as part of his job he'd have to lift 50 pounds or more, which was a big restriction by his doctors, but that wasn't really something that they looked into or bothered to really strongly consider. And then they just terminated his claim based on that.
Was he ever paid?
He was paid for a short while during that surgery and recovery period, but then claim terminated after that.
And when you got a hold of the claim file, what were the next steps that you took?
So I thought it was really important, in particular with him, is to get a functional capacity exam on the record. It's something that you want to. I didn't want to put him through any real undue or unnecessary exams, considering kind of how problematic his issues were already. I didn't want any sort of exacerbation of that. But I thought that in his particular case, there probably wouldn't be anything like that would occur from a functional capacity exam. I also thought it was important that some follow-up neurological nerve conduction studies were done, especially on the lower extremities that he was having symptoms in, and they weren't really considering that. Prudential really wasn't looking at that as part of the impairing symptom or the overall picture. And it seemed to be that after he had those nerve conduction studies done on his upper and lower extremities, he continued to have radiculopathy and radiating symptoms and problems and a level of impairment even after the surgeries.
The nurse who initially reviewed the claim, did she actually speak to the neurosurgeon or send a random letter?
Well, she spoke to the neurosurgeons, tried to send some follow-up letters to some other doctors, but actually did speak to the surgeon that had done the surgery. Oftentimes, these doctors don't have a lot of time on their hands. These phone calls are extremely brief. The medical reviewer, in this case this nurse at Prudential, could ask exactly the questions they want to ask and get most likely the answers they want from the doctor. And there was no release to return to work. That's something that this doctor, we had clarify on the appeal, that he wasn't releasing our client to return to work, especially given the physical nature of his occupation. I mean, there's a lot of other restrictions there and a lot of other limitations that he would have in the performance of his occupational duties. So that was something that we thought would be really important to ensure was identified and really addressed in the appeal.
What were the duties of your client's occupation, meaning what did you have to prove in order for him to be disabled?
Well, with regards to being a sexton in a church or a chapel, it's a pretty physical job. It might not seem like it's a physical job, but you're, basically walking the grounds of the church or the chapel at all times. This isn't a job that you're conducting sitting down. You're moving heavy furniture, positioning things for the different services and ceremonies that are done in the chapels and in the churches. You're basically conducting and managing everything that has to do with this building, okay, inside and outside. So it's a very physical job.
So it was considered almost a heavy-duty type job.
Absolutely.
And how did Prudential consider the job when they evaluated the duties of the job?
There wasn't a heavy focus on the occupational duties by them. It seemed to be that they received what they wanted from this surgeon or from the doctor in terms of this description that 80% of his issues were resolved. He had some injections that were done as a follow-up to the surgery that seemed to resolve some symptoms. When they hear, well, he's 80% symptoms resolved, that means he can go back to work, is basically where they're looking at it.
And what Prudential likes to do in these claims is they'll ask a doctor, exactly like they did in this case, are there any restrictions and limitations? And most surgeons, they put a client into surgery because they want to avoid spinal cord paralysis or future problems for the claimant. Mostly it's to avoid paralysis and to try to alleviate some pain. So when you ask a surgeon, does a claimant have or a patient have restrictions, limitations, most of the time they say no, because basically what they're saying is that this patient is now stable because they had surgery. They should do what they think they can do, because a doctor treats the patient and not the chart. And if the doctor knows the patient's stable, then they're going to say, what you can functionally do is now up to you. Whether or not your body can do it or not, I don't physically know that, because as a doctor, I'm not in your body. The damage that's done is done. I'm just going to stabilize you now. So when these surgeons especially, and not like the traditional treating doctor who's ongoing, get called and say, is there any restrictions, limitations? They're thinking, can the person drive? Can they walk? Can they bathe themselves? All the activities of daily living, change themselves, transfer themselves from the bed and stuff like that. And the doctors say, no, they can do all that. But had the nurse said, can this particular sexton lift 50 pounds? Right away, the doctor would have said.
Can they move heavy furniture?
No,
Can
right.
they,
Can they repeatedly set up, 50 chairs? Can they set up this event over here? Can they stand for 2 hours and, do whatever they need to do? Doctor would have said no, but Prudential and their nurses, they never asked those specific questions whatsoever. So when you did your functional capacity exam, how targeted and focused were you in terms of figuring out the actual restrictions and limitations for your client?
Well, and the reason for this is we knew how physically demanding his occupation was. So with the functional capacity exam, it really wouldn't be a real high threshold that we would need to meet. Right. So we were really looking in terms of if we could show that he was functioning at under, say, a medium physical functional level, then he's disabled. And he's going to remain disabled. And this is kind of reaching that maximum medical improvement category. And it was successful in doing that. So.
But this is one of those denials from Prudential that most people think is shocking. Not shocking to us because we see them all the time, but one really where Prudential should have been like, this is a no-brainer to approve, at least for the first 24 months of disability, which the definition was unable to perform substantial material duties of your occupation. Now, that may change after 24 months to any gainful occupation, but usually in Prudential policies, it's any gainful occupation that pays 60% of what the claimant used to earn. So even with that, if they go, okay, we understand you were medium duty or heavy duty, had to lift 50 pounds, now maybe you can do a sedentary type job, but since you were making $100,000 a year, we now have to find a job that will pay you $60,000 a year. And that also is going to be, and that's an issue that you're going to continue to represent your client and get him through that transition of disability, which is another area where we often see a lot of disabilities. So, you can never let your guard down with Prudential. It keeps going and going even after you get past the change of definition, because they're always going to want to review it. And even though you had surgery, or you might go and say, yeah, doc, those injections help me, they think, oh, okay, you're better. Yeah. So it's like, we always tell the claimants, look, you might go in one day and feel okay. But okay for someone who's suffering all the time would be like you and I, who go in and have, no pain whatsoever. We go in and say we're 0 out of 10. They go in, and what would be a 10 for us, if we were in pain, we'd be like, we're 10 out of 10. They go in with that same level of pain and be like, doc, today I'm like a 4.
Right.
Because now people with chronic pain learn to live with that type of pain. It doesn't mean they can go work.
It's really such a relative thing, because it's almost like someone that has lost sight in their eye, and then suddenly start regaining some sense of seeing lights and blurry pictures, and to them that's a tremendous change, a tremendous improvement from where they were, right?
So you also have to be careful going in and saying, no good deed goes unpunished with these medical records. So if you go in and go, doc, I'm feeling good. Well, because you're good as a 4 or 5 out of 10 that day, because you're used to being 8 or 9 and can't sleep and in pain, 6 out of 6 hours a day, Prudential is going to punish you for that.
Absolutely.
So you have to go in, unfortunately, and complain, because your claim is only as good as it is on paper.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, Prudential gets the papers, they review them, and then they send them to their doctors. And if the complaints aren't in there and the doctor isn't documenting everything you said was wrong, then they go, the only thing we know is that you're doing good. And that's exactly what happened in this case. Fortunately, you were able to clarify it, plus provide additional evidence, which is what the goal of the appeal is. And now the claimant's approved, and hopefully will stay on claim for as long as he needs the benefits. So if you're someone with a Prudential or short-term, long-term disability claim, feel free to reach out to Caesar or myself or any of our disability lawyers. We'll immediately provide you with a free phone consultation. No matter where you live in the country, we're available to assist you, and we look forward to the opportunity to speak with you. Hi, I'm Gregory Dell, the managing attorney of Dell Disability Lawyers, and I hope you find the video you just watched helpful. We put these videos out all of the time, and we'd love if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel. Beyond our videos on our YouTube channel, we also have lots of information available on our website at diattorney.com, and we encourage you to come to our website. The goal is that we want you to be educated about the disability insurance process, and when you get to our website, you'll see that we have information all about your specific disability insurance company, your occupation, and your medical condition. And we've designed our website such that you can easily search our website to find things that you may specifically be looking for. Now, at our website, we have thousands and thousands of pages of information, hundreds of videos that you can search, plus we're building a section of reviews of all the disability insurance companies, and we have the Ask Our Lawyer section where you can go ahead and ask us any questions that you may have. Now, we realize that you may not need us right now, but you may need us in the future to help you with your disability claim, and we think one of the best ways to keep in touch is by clicking the button below and subscribing to our channel. And most importantly, again, no matter where you live in the country, we're always available. Just go ahead and give us a call. We're happy to discuss your claim and let you know immediately if we can help you.